Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Eric Henry, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
It's a real pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Minneapolis. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about maintaining healthy organizational culture during periods of growth. You know, I think it's hard enough to have healthy organizational culture in the best of circumstances in any organization, in any setting, at any given point in time. But particularly during growth, during rapid growth, that is super challenging, especially if you've had an acquisition, a merger, anything like that. That's extra challenging. But just growth, period. You're adding new people. It's just really hard. And to do growth is hard. To do growth with a healthy culture is hard. So we're going to try to unpack this, explore and discuss this as we go throughout the conversation today. As we get started, I wanted to share Eric's bio with everybody. Eric Henry is the president of Carousel Digital Signage, a company that traces its roots to 1997 when one of its founders recognized the limitations of existing multimedia software for educational displays. This insight drove the mission to create a user-friendly signage software, a principle that still defines Carousel's identity today. Eric fosters partnerships with esteemed global enterprises while crafting a strategy that centers on delivering unparalleled value to customers. A visionary leader, Eric thrives on discerning opportunities amidst challenges and unearthing the potential within each individual he engages on a daily basis. Eric's leadership embodies Carousel's commitment to making technology accessible while ensuring that every individual feels acknowledged and valued. I really like all of that. There's a lot more I could share about your background, but I'm going to pause there. Anything you would like to share about your background, personal context, before we dive on it?
Yeah, I think it really is. It comes down what's encapsulated in all those words you read is the heart that I have is that people feel seen and valued. Like that's what it
Yeah.
really like all of those words are kind of saying that. And it's interesting because we're a technology company, so we'll talk about like how do you use tech, like how are you mindful of seeing your people and being highly relational and building a good culture when you're a tech company. And I think even that presents some interesting challenges in itself. So nothing else to add to the bio. Love to keep the conversation rolling. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, I love that. Helping people be seen, valued, helping people, feel like they can bring their whole selves to work and contribute in meaningful ways. That's really what it's all about. That's what we all want for ourselves. If you're leading a team, that's what you want for your team. That's where people can be the most productive. That's where people can be the most innovative. To create that kind of environment that can be a bit of a unicorn, though. That's hard to do sometimes,
indeed.
because we all know that business, can be dog eat dog, and you're trying to meet deadlines, and there's just the daily grind, and you're putting out fires, and there's just all these different things, and so it's really nice to say, like we all
Hmm.
sit around and we think about, oh, it's really nice to have these nice cultures, and we all agree that it's really wonderful, but when it comes down to the grind of day to day,
Right. Yeah.
those nice thoughts sometimes can go by the wayside very quickly when we're met with the immediacy of whatever has to get done, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, it's interesting when you ask like how do you maintain culture in times of growth? One of the things that is highlighted even in the bio is this company's been around since 1997. So we've been like this perpetual startup company.
Mm,
And so you could kind of groove in a culture for a long time. When
yeah.
you weren't in a season of growth, you can reach all of your people and you can hire people that all kind of line up with the fabric of the organization. And so, for us, it's like we could pat ourselves on the back, like, hey, we have this great culture, which I think has been true. But the dynamics of our organization, we could kind of pick and choose, and we could take a couple of years to get somebody really comfortable operating in the culture that we created, which we got pretty good at. But then, as the topic for today is growth, When you add that layer of growth on, that's a whole different dimension and dynamic that gets created in how in the world do you maintain culture? Because as you're saying, for us, it may not be the grind when you're not growing at the pace that like our organization's growing now. And even the how do you disseminate information and those types of things
Yeah.
looks a little different in a season of growth, right? When people that are coming into the organization, because growth, two couple things, right? Revenue or team, staff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of at the core of maybe the where my brain goes in this conversation is in my leadership, and what creates healthy culture is clarity. And so like that's the
Hmm.
fundamental to me, that's the fundamental thing that I've been really trying to lean into, I would say the past 5 to 7 years, and understanding my leadership growth and my ability to really help create good culture is I have to be really, really clear. And that's clear around strategy, clear about what our values are and how we should interact with customers and what pace we should run at as an organization. And I think growth is what it ultimately really stretches is the ability to have clarity within your organization. What are the expectations? How do we work together? What are the values that we say we have really our values? Did the people we hire line up with the values we said we have? Like that that is like to me the fundamental challenge we've seen in the last few years and had to learn through. Like how do you have clarity and create clarity for an organization, and how do you make sure that that clarity flows all the way through? So I'll
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
pause.
Well, absolutely. Clarity is really important. And as you were explaining all of that,
Hmm.
one word that comes to mind that I think is parallel, perhaps foundational, or at least connected to is trust, right?
Absolutely.
If you're having clarity, you're having alignment, you're
Hmm.
having trust that's connected to all of this, right?
Yeah.
Because people understand expectations and you have mutual accountability and trust
Hmm.
woven through all of the things that are happening, through the communication channels, through the interpersonal relationships, through the formal reporting lines, the informal connection points, and how people are interacting with each other across silos, all the different things, right? You have
Yeah.
to have trust in
Hmm.
order to have a healthy culture.
For
You
sure.
just do because relationships are built on trust and culture is built on relationships.
Hmm.
And so I love what you said there. And it's so often lost. And the bigger an organization gets, the harder it is to have clarity, the harder it
Hmm.
is to have effective communication. And I think everyone intends to clearly communicate. I don't think
Right.
anyone
For sure.
wakes up
Yeah.
nobody wakes up thinking I'm going to well, maybe some people do, but most people don't wake up thinking I'm going to try to hoard information and try to not
Hmm.
share and be open. Like most people want to try to communicate effectively, right?
Right. Right.
But we tend to be pretty bad at it.
Hmm.
you know
Absolutely. Yeah. It's been one of the great, I would say it's been one of the greatest challenges of my life. And I think it's absolutely uh, critical. The word trust is the other word that goes right along with that. Because if you're not clear, I think a lot of times what happens is unintentionally we start telling ourselves stories that erode trust. Like that's what
Yeah.
what I've seen in our organization is people have been in relationship, they know each other, they've been kind of on the front lines, they've been in the trenches with one another. And one of those things that happens when you're growing is you also are saying, okay, if we're going to grow and maintain this growth, we have to start putting systems and process in place and start really like operationalizing our business.
Yeah.
And through that process, you have to start saying no to some things and maybe not going on the same adventures or doing the same heroics that you used to do as a smaller team. And I think that itself has actually eroded some trust between teams because they would say, well, wait a minute. 2 years ago, when I needed to get this PO processed, you would have jumped, over every hurdle and cleared all these mountains to process this thing. But we're realizing as a larger and larger organization, you can't do those same things. And so sometimes the trust is becoming eroded because we're telling ourselves a story. That person's not for me anymore, right? That person's not trying to help me win. Like, wait a minute. And so a lot of my, when I say clarity, a lot of that is how do I help the narrative within the organization? Is that really what's happening with that team? Or has that team got 16 other things going on as well? So that's really, I think, critical. I love that you brought up trust, because that's like an underlying a thing that I think maybe we have
Yeah.
assumptions around, but it's not really there very often. And it comes out in so many different ways. The fact that we lack trust in one another.
Yeah, well, and in the example you just gave, there can be so many reasons why what was approved or the hurdles that were,
Hmm.
the obstacles that were moved to make something happen 2 years ago aren't done today. There could be so many reasons for that. And so often what we do is, and it's so unfortunate, like instead of just explaining to somebody, like people are, big kids, like we understand, we're adults.
Yeah.
Like instead of
Yeah.
just explaining to them the why behind, oh, we did it before, we can't do it today, this is why. Instead of doing that, oftentimes we just end up gaslighting them. Like
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
we just kind of
Yeah.
like pretend like, well, no, we don't do that. We've never done that. We have a policy, or we say stuff like that, and they're not stupid. They like
Hmm.
remember, no, like 2 years
Right.
ago, you
Right.
literally did that for me, and then that absolutely undermines trust because
Hmm.
you're literally gaslighting them, and they have a longer memory than that, and
Hmm.
you may not even realize you're gaslighting them. You might actually think that,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
problem. And but people have a long memory, so you do have to be very careful about that. And you just really have to be explicit about
Hmm.
explaining the why behind things.
Yeah.
Explain why it's important to do certain things. And as you grow, there have to be consistencies in policy and practices and procedures. You just have to,
Hmm.
otherwise things just devolve into chaos.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I would highlight one of the things that I've experienced and really learned, especially in the last 5 years, I would say, is as you're growing. So there's kind of a couple of things when you're adding new people to your team. You have sort of this historical culture, this understood culture, with a group of people that have been maybe working together for 5, 10, 15 years. They built trust with one another. They understand sort of the pace of the organization. And new people would come in with the same value, like the same core values, our core values: compassion, clarity, continual improvement. Those three things, I would say we've hired well around those three things. The challenge has been different people that come into your organization have different levels of pace. Some people are, I work 80 hours a week. That's what I do. I'm just always driven, and it's all about winning, and it's all about the numbers. And there's some other people that are much more, I'm going to maintain a healthy pace. I'm going to block and tackle, and I'm going to do this for the long run. So I'm just going to, and sometimes that mismatch of pace is a
yeah,
thing that causes trust issues. Well, I don't know if that person's really, is that person pulling their weight on the team? Is that person causing chaos because they're out doing stuff for customers that's setting a different expectation. And so that's been another interesting thing to navigate, is what is the pace of this culture, not just what are the values. So that's been another thing that we've had to kind of learn how to navigate and make sure that as a group of people, we all understand the pace that we're setting.
yeah, and that comes back to consistency, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And obviously, we don't need everyone to be exactly the same, right? We're not we're
No.
not looking for complete conformity. Not everyone's a monolith. Like we
Right.
can have variation. People have their own personalities, their own styles. Like we're
Hmm.
not suggesting otherwise. To have a healthy culture does not mean we all have to be the same. But
Absolutely
there
not.
has to be some level of consistency, and we have to have some level of just alignment
Hmm.
in order, to be able to function, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I hear you saying.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think the alignment around shared purpose, the alignment around shared values, the alignment around just a clear understanding about expectations, etc. Right?
Yeah.
All of those things are
Yeah.
really core, and that coming back to this scaling thing, coming back to the growth phase,
Hmm.
that gets really tricky. when
Hmm.
when you're at a founding stage, maybe you just have a couple people, a small team. You start to grow to a dozen, a couple dozen, 50 people. Now you're up to 100, a couple hundred, whatever.
Yeah.
Like you start to go through these growth stages. Man, it disrupts all of that because those
Yeah.
expectations are shifting in real
Right.
time.
Hmm.
sometimes like from day to day, week to week, like
For sure. For sure.
and being able to have that open communication and you may think as the leader or as the team leader, whatever, you may
Yeah.
think that you're like ad nauseum
Yeah.
communicating over and
Yeah.
over and over
Oh
again,
yeah.
but I
Yeah.
can almost guarantee you it's not enough.
Hmm. For sure. Yeah, and it's you start to understand why people have mantras, right? It's like, okay,
Hmm.
okay, I said it before, like what? No. And so what we're trying this year, brand new, we're introducing this concept of a clarity score. Uh, so so we're kind of as we're sending out our surveying of our teams is and we're kind of learning around it at this moment, but we understand like at the leadership level what's interesting to me is I found even at the leadership level where people have been in meetings for 6 months may not necessarily totally understand. And it's like, well, wait a minute, if you've been hearing this for 6 months and then I lay it out in a monthly all team meeting one time, probably not going to be very clear. It's going to be the
Right.
next 6 months of reinforcing this strategy or this why or this direction, this hill and so we're introducing this clarity score to try to understand and measure like does the organization really understand what we've been saying? Like we're so used to it because we've been thinking about it. And that's
Exactly.
the thing that I've the whole clarity thing for me, it was one person said to me at one point, it's super helpful. He goes, Eric, when you talk, it's like popcorn. It's like you have this, and eventually I understand that those were all connected. And I can see why you were talking about these four things, but it wasn't really very clear that these four things were related to one another. And that was really what set me off on this journey of realizing, boy, I'm not a very clear leader. It's totally clear in my brain,
Yeah.
and eventually people see it. But okay, how from the outset can I bring people through a this to this to this process? And that's really stretched me. And fortunately, there's other people on our leadership team that are really gifted in very pragmatically bringing people through. Here's where we're going, and here's how we're going to get there. And so we've actually so it's interesting in the bio you read that I'm the president. We actually shifted roles this year. So
Hmm.
as we're growing, we recognized we need to really systematize this business, and that's not me. I'm much more of a entrepreneurial, create and dream and make new things. And it's like we're not in the make new things season, like we
Hmm.
were when we were a founding company. We're in the systematize, groove in, really drive this. And so I'm actually shifting my seat over and playing a little different role, and we're moving a different gentleman who's really gifted at systematizing and organizing and bringing people through in a very like pragmatic way, and it's
Hmm.
paying dividends already. Just actually this week we had our all hands meeting where everybody was in Minneapolis. It was literally 18 below zero, and we bring people
Wow.
from the south, so they weren't super happy about that, but the meetings were great. Um, and so anyway, so that's kind of what we recognize as an organization too is clarity, trust, and then also I would say being willing to just assess like your skills and your gifts, kind of like what you said earlier around not everybody's the same. Let's celebrate the fact that people have different wiring, different pacing, different skill sets, and just understand that and utilize them the best that they can be. That's what gets fun, right? It's like, wait a minute, that person's really good at that. We moved our VP of sales, we actually moved him to a partnership role because he is so passionate about lead gen.
Hmm.
So let's just unleash him in that. And it's super exciting to see somebody get put in the spot where they can just excel, right? Like
Hmm.
that. I
Yeah.
love that. Absolutely love that. And that's motivating for other people that are maybe newer to the org. Like, wait a minute, they actually do see and understand my skills and gifts and to the extent that we can put them in that spot. We don't always have a lot of flexibility given the size of our organization, but to the extent we can show that we understand that person, how they're wired, how they're gifted, what their passions are, and put them in that spot, man, that gets fun. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, what would you recommend, to, an organization? Let's say let's assume even you had a healthy culture,
Hmm.
but you start to scale, it starts to slip away. Things, some toxicity starts to slip in, or just some of the healthy habits start to go away,
Hmm.
whatever. But you find yourself in a position where you got to start to reintroduce some healthy habits, some healthy cultural practices. What would you recommend?
So a couple of things come to my mind. One of the things, one of the books that was super helpful to me, Crucial Conversations.
Mm,
We're Midwesterners, and so we like, Minnesota nice is a phrase that a lot of people have heard.
yeah,
And so you're not always used to having a direct conversation and understanding how to have that in a very healthy way. And so I think that's one thing is looking at your culture and saying, okay, can you have a conversation that is a safe and healthy conversation, but a real one. Like let's talk about it because I think that's super important. A lot of times what happens is you might be frustrated or seeing things going sideways in your culture, but not addressing them with the individual. And so I think that to me is super important. If you don't have those skills as a leader, and I recognize that I had some of that, but I needed to be better at it reading and researching, getting some coaching on how can I create an environment where I can have real conversations with people where they understand the phrase that I like to say is here's where we are, but we can't stay here. We need to get to this place. That's a totally fine conversation to have because we always like on our continual improvement core value, that's what we want to celebrate. Like, hey, let's just acknowledge where we are. And I
yeah,
think a lot of times we don't want to do that. We want to paint different pictures or those types of things because it's uncomfortable. But that's really where the growth happens. Hey, this is where we are. We're not threatening, we're not firing, we're just saying like this is, but we can't be at this place. We got to get to this place. So how do we do that together? And just start having that dialogue and understanding where people are coming from, or maybe I'm just misreading what's actually happening and this person was intending to do this thing and so anyway so that would be one of the things that I would really encourage is within a culture if you see it going sideways figure out how to have good healthy conversations about why that is and address it directly and not not just like be frustrated about it. Another thing that I sort of happened upon, I mentioned we had our all hands meeting this week a couple years ago. um, we wanted to do the year in review, and that fell on me. And I was like, boy, it's hard for me to remember a year ago. And so what I did was
mm,
I was like trying to solve a problem. I was like, wait a minute, we have this thing called core value stories. It's a Slack channel that people put in a core value story. They saw somebody exhibiting one of the core values, and we really wanted it to be peer driven. And the great thing is, as an organization, it's pretty representative. And what I ended up doing was telling the story of the year of our business through core value stories because
mm,
you forget things you did last January or things that
yeah,
happened or major initiative things that happened in March where the team had to do these awesome things together. So what I did was I went back and I just screen captured all these different core value stories and told the year in review. And I literally just did that this week again for 2024. Here, look, this person got onboarded. Here's the three people that came and got them up to speed. Hey, here was a crisis where everybody had to jump in on a Saturday and they did this thing together. Awesome. Here was a thing where somebody brought a lot of clarity and tell the story throughout the year of our organization through the core values being exhibited. So you got a couple of things happening. You're reinforcing the behaviors of the organization and you're celebrating the people at the same time and reinforcing that in 2025, what we want to see is more and more core value stories in that channel where peers are recognizing one another, not me doing core value. Like I was two of those stories, I think, out of the whole I forget how many I shared, 70 or something like that. Like I went through in fairly rapid succession, but that just reinforcing that, actually having core values that, you hear a lot of organizations get them off the wall and into your company. I love
right.
whenever I'm in a meeting and people go in the spirit of clarity or in is this compassionate? Is this compassionate to our customers or to one another? They're asking those questions. Hey, as a continual improvement thing, you'll hear people saying those phrases. So I like that our core values fit us, and we kind of look at those every once in a while. But that's really what I would encourage is continual reinforcement of these are our core values. We do actually want to run our business through that lens and celebrate that. They show up in the Slack channel. You can go look at those. But even as leadership stands up in an all company meeting that you spend a lot of money bringing people into and spend 15, 20 minutes going through and just telling stories, I think the team leaves with, yep, this is pretty important.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
absolutely. Great examples. This has just been a really fun conversation. I note the time. I need to let you go here in just a minute. But
mhm.
before we wrap things up, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, where they can find your podcast, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, final word. Whew. All right. Well, we'll start with the easier ones, but yeah, certainly Eric Henry on LinkedIn, and I think we'll probably share a link on that, and
Yeah.
carouselsignage.com. You can find me there. You mentioned a podcast. I do a podcast that kind of highlights nonprofits that are doing cool work around the world. So I just love featuring these different nonprofits again. As we kind of kicked off at the top, it's really important for me for people to feel seen and heard, and that's really um, why I want to highlight these different nonprofits that are doing really hard work around the world. So that's my podcast. It's called The Grand Weaver. You can find that on all the platforms. So I'd love it if you checked that out. That would be great. As far as the final word, I think again, we're a technology company, and so I kind of talked about the challenges of if you're a tech company, how do you make sure your people are seen and heard? We always think about how do we leverage technology in a way that doesn't replace relationship, right? And I think to me it all comes down to any healthy culture has to be built on relationships. And so I think whatever your context is, really really lean into, okay, how are we fostering relationships? And there's all the remote work, back to work, all these different discussions. Do we use this Slack thing or Teams or Zoom call? Like how do we use all this technology in a way where the ultimate goal is relationship? And the reason I think relationship, and I'm going to tie trust back in here, that's the only way that trust really happens. There's got to be proximity. There has to be mutual understanding, shared stories. All of those things lead to a culture of trust, clarity, and you're going to see much better results, right? Like I think the challenge that I would have for organizations, if you're, maybe this will be controversial, if your return to work strategy is all based on the fact that you don't trust your teams to do their thing, I would challenge you to really think about how can you measure performance and set expectations. Again, comes back to clarity. Hey, this is the expectation of you and your role. Here's how we're looking at it. Here's what I expect you to get done. I don't need to stand over your shoulder and watch you do that. Like there should be ways, and I'm going to challenge people to really think about, are the motivations that we have in our culture because we don't trust our teams? And I think a lot of times it is. Some of the things that we do are because we don't trust people. Okay, how do we restore a culture of trust? How do we restore a culture of clarity so that our teams really excel? And it will pay dividends. It really will.
I 100% agree. Thank you so much, Eric. It's been such a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Eric can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.